Muy buenos días. Un saludo al reverendo Andrés Cruz Gallegos
Good morning. Greetings to the Reverend Andrés Cruz Gallego, where he's at, there in Veracruz, South Veracruz, in Soconusco, congregation that the Reverend Eliseo Martinez pastors, and all the ministers and brothers and sisters that are in that place. Today, September 27th of this year 2023. Our brother Andres has already started this tour since Monday. On Monday he was in Villahermosa. There they were listening to the message, the words that were spoken on Monday, which were very important. And it is in this continuation of this tour that will continue through pastors of Encinal, Colorado, Oaxaca, there on Thursday. This is tomorrow, September 28th, with the Reverend Herminio Antonio Juan. On Friday, he will be in Tuxtla Gutierrez with the Reverend José Jiménez. On Saturday, he will be at the pastors' meeting there in that day also. In Escarcega, Campeche, with the Reverend José Cruz Romero on Monday. On Saturday, remember that we are placing it for the first Saturday of the month of October, so that it won't take too long, since next Saturday will be the 7th. And taking advantage that our brother Miguel is in Venezuela, and this weekend, where several pastors from different places in Venezuela and different countries are going to be there, we're going to take advantage of this next Saturday to have that meeting. And our brother Andres, then, he will have it there with the Reverend José Cruz Romero in Campeche. On Monday, he will be in Matamoros, October the 2nd, with the Reverend Alfredo Aguilar. On Tuesday, he will be with David Palacios, Reverend David Palacios, there in Reynosa, Tamaulipas. On Wednesday, Wednesday the 4th, he will be in San Luis Potosí with the Reverend Pedro Martinez Aguilar. On October 5th, on a Thursday, he will be in Guadalajara with Reverend Josué Villaseñor Hernandez. And on Friday, October 6th, he will be in Chihuatanejo, Guerrero, with Reverend Ofael Villaseñor. Those are the places where our brother Andrés Cruz Gallegos will be visiting and sharing and having fellowship around the Word of God, and also bringing these words of greeting to all the brethren in those places where he will be. In Deuteronomy, in chapter 10, it tells us, "At that time the Lord said unto me, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and come up unto me into the mountain, and make thee an ark of wood. And I will write on the tables the words that were in the first tables, which thou breakest, and thou shalt put them in the ark." Remember that he had broken those first tables. He threw them down because of the people who had made that golden calf, that he threw them down out of his hand. In other words, he went down with the tables, one on each hand, and he threw them against the ground and broke them. And here, that is in chapter 9 of Deuteronomy, when he is there speaking about that which happened, which we see it in Exodus around chapter 33, 34, which We'll deepen a little more on these days about it. That is around chapter 34 of Exodus. But let us continue here on this part where he's speaking of this portion here, which what he's saying is as how he did after breaking the two first ones. It says, let us read the entire thing again. And at that time the Lord said unto him, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and come up unto me into the mountain, and make thee an ark of wood. And I will write on the tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest, and thou shalt put them in the ark. And I made an ark of shittim wood, and hewed 2 tables of stones like unto the first, and went up into the mount, having the 2 tables in mine hand. And he wrote on the tables, according to the first writing, the 10 commandments, which the Lord spake unto you in mount out of the midst of the fire, in the day of the assembly, and the Lord gave them unto me. And I turned myself and came down from the mountain, and put the tables in the ark which I had made, and there they be, as the Lord commanded me. And there he writes, ark. And the children of Israel took their journey from Beeroth of the children of Joachim to Mosera. There Aaron died, and there he was buried. And Eleazar his son ministered in priest office in his stead. From thence they journeyed unto Gadgoda, and from Gadgoda to Josbath, and land of rivers of waters. And at that time the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord to minister unto him, and to bless in his name unto this day. Wherefore Levi had no part nor inheritance with his brethren. The Lord is his inheritance, according as the Lord thy God promised him. And I stayed in the mount, according to the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. And the Lord hearkened unto me at that time also, and the Lord would not destroy thee. And the Lord said unto me, Arise, take thy journey before the people, that they may go in and possess the land, which I swore unto their fathers to give unto them. And on that occasion, God was showing Moses there that the people were going to enter the promised land, because that was the promise, to enter into the promised land. And notice that he continues speaking to his prophet and telling him that program that he already outlined and had to be fulfilled. But even though he was speaking that way to Moses, notice that at the end Moses died because of striking the rock a second time, and he was not the one who entered the people into the promised land. But God always fulfilled that promise, because the one who was going to bring them in is the same one who delivered them using Moses. For here he was going to bring them in himself, but using Joshua. And now, on verse 12, and now Israel, what does the Lord thy God require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God, that walk in all his ways, and love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good? Behold, the heaven and the heavens of heavens is the Lord's thy God, the earth also with all that therein is. Only the Lord hath a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chosen their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. And he writes, I love Jacob, that is, and he writes, elected. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and terrible, which regardeth no person, nor taketh reward. He doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and widow, and loveth the stranger in giving him food and raiment. Love ye therefore the stranger, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, him shalt thou serve, and to him shalt thou cleave, and swear by his name. You may please be seated. Here we are seeing how God, through Moses, he tells him that only God demands that you fear him, that you walk in his ways, that you love him, and that you serve him with all your heart, with all your soul. Now, notice how the Hebrew people, when Moses came down from the mountain, and Joshua told him that noise. Let us look it up here on Exodus in chapter 34. Where he tells us, chapter 32, is chapter 32, verse 15, it says, And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the two tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, There is a noise of war in the camp. And he said, It is not the voice of them that shout for mastery, neither it is the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing do I hear. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf, and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hand, and broke them beneath the mount. Notice, he broke there the tables, those first ones, where God had written the law. Now he continues saying, look in the same chapter 32 in verse 6. It says, And they rose up early. That was when they made the golden calf, it says. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offering, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Now, look in Numbers. Numbers 20, verse 7 says, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and he shall give forth his water. And thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so that thou shalt give the congregation and their beast drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believe me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. Now notice, we saw these two places where Moses had those two incidents in which the people, let us say, they had to see him acting in a certain way, but he could not act in a certain way because of the people. Act in a way that would change the divine program. Notice, when this is in the book Israel before the metal serpent, it tells us there on page 25. This is the little book that in the message a little while ago, he was looking for something. And for example, he had to go through all pages 8 or pages 10. He had to go on all messages in that page to see if it was the one. And he told me, I have to list them from 1 up to the end, so that would be easier. Now notice on this page, 25 of that message, Israel before the metal serpent, which is the little book of Israel, sons in the wilderness, it says, But when he glorified himself down there instead of God, before that rock, when God told him, Go, speak to the rock, don't smite it, speak to it. The rock was only smitten once. And he writes, forbearing our sins, the divine judgment would fall on Christ in his first coming. He writes there all across. But when he glorified himself down there instead of God, before the rock, when God told him, said, Go, speak to the rock, don't smite it, speak to it. The rock was only smitten once. In other words, in his first coming, and that is what we read that he wrote there. And Moses got his temper all up and run down there and smote the rock. He didn't bring water. He smote it again, and he brought water. Said, You rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? Like that, and brought forth the waters. Because God had to listen to that prophet, because he would endued him with that power. And that broke the whole program of God's Bible. Christ was smitten once. We speak to the rock now, and he brings forth its water. See? It's already been smitten. Just speak to it, and it brings forth its water. Now notice. And there he writes also, Moses and his temper. And he writes, he broke God's program. He also writes, he broke God's program. He broke the whole Bible program. Now, see how delicate that was. And what he did there was something very, but very marked in the divine program. Notice, he broke the type of what the second coming of the Lord would be. When it is said, broke the divine program, what God had already traced that was going to happen. Notice, at 1977, Brother Branham said that that was the end of the world system and the entrance into the millennium. And that ministry corresponded to 3.5 years before and 3.5 years after the Great Tribulation, where those 1954 years would be fulfilled from one point of view. Let us say from one angle. That part of that time of God dealing with the Gentiles was seen. Notice, everything was in his program. The deliverer had been born as he placed it in a message. And he writes, Moses, deliverer. And notice, every time there was a deliverer, that a deliverer was coming, there was a massacre. There was a massacre back then in the time of Moses. When God brought the deliverer, the devil always moves to the scene. So that when he appears as a child, a baby, because the deliverer has to be born, the enemy comes, who is the devil, the enemy of God, and destroys. In other words, he kills. By killing the children, he is destroying the program. Although he does not touch it, he does not kill it, because although at the end, look at Jesus. Apparently the devil had the victory there. But it was a victory for the devil and a defeat for Jesus. But it was the greatest defeat that the devil had and the greatest victory for God and his program. But notice, by him trying to kill, to eliminate that deliverer, he would be trying to break the divine program. And notice, Moses with his temper, which around here, somewhere in the same message, he says, notice on page 24, it says, look at what a warrior Moses was. In his last hour, he got down there with that terrible temper and finally glorified himself in the stead of God. And he come back and writes, Moses and his temper. And God would not permit him, because it was all pre-pictured, just like the organization today, Methodist, Baptist, Pentecost, all the rest of them. They're glorifying themselves. And he writes, he smote the rock, and today the denominations do it. Now notice how there, and in another place, he says, he writes here that Moses equals organizations. We were talking about that last year in June. Our brother Miguel was also studying about that. Now notice how Moses is represented there in organizations and what the denominations do. Because what the devil wants to do is to break the divine program. And that is what Moses did. He let himself, because of his temper, break the whole program of the Bible. But notice how there, the deliverer appears. And the devil moves to the scene to try to eliminate him, and there is a massacre. And there was also a sign in heaven. And also in the time of Jesus, there was also a massacre of children. And there was also a sign in heaven, because the enemy of God does not want the children of God to obtain the freedom, the deliverance in the time when they are living. They were in bondage in Egypt, and God sent a deliverer. And sending Jesus in his first coming is to deliver us from the kingdom of darkness, where mankind has been in bondage. But notice that when he comes in his first coming, he brings that deliverance of everyone who receives him and believe it, and believes in him, which was during the dispensation of grace. Now, notice that all the elements, all the signs, all the characters were in each deliverance. Why did not happen in the time of Jesus? Because in the time of Jesus, which was that occasion that he smote the rock for the first time, that represented Christ dying on the cross. Notice. And that was not affected. The whole program ran very well. But at his second coming, when he comes with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and trumpet of God, where there must be a forerunner, and there must also be in the midst of mankind those instruments that the devil raised up in the time of Moses and the time of Jesus to make that massacre. There was also there, notice around the decade of the 40s, in other words, in the 30s, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, around there. And notice that there were also certain signs. And those massacres took place. But not only of children, but there were children, young people, adults, everything. In other words, the enemy of God wanted to eliminate the one who got sent as deliverer. But notice, by Moses smiting the rock for the second time, and by breaking the Bible program there, then God has to, as when in this time we can say a hard drive is damaged, there is a program there that has all the files and everything, but that is broken. Then another format, hard drive, is placed. Let us talk like that in those terms, in that part of computers. Excuse me. Then that other hard drive is placed because that is what was damaged or broke. And God continues with his plans. He continues his plans. But notice, he knew everything from the beginning. And then back then, he did not have to go on the run. Wait, Moses, I already told him he's not going to enter the promised land for what he did. So now let us begin to prepare a boy over here. Let us put him to be born. And he will have the trajectory, and we're going to take care of him in his trajectory, and that he may learn everything, so that then he brings the people into the promised land. God already had all that in his mind. And he already had the man there, who was Joshua, who was always by Moses' side, at Moses' disposal. He didn't separate from the temple or tabernacle, it says there in some place. Now notice how God already had the man prepared. He was already preparing him for when that time would come, the man was on the scene who would continue that work in the fulfillment of what he promised of entering them into the promised land there at that time. Now notice how in 74 to 77, notice from 46 to 48, Israel, there in 48 they have their flag, they had their hymn or national song, had everything. A nation had already been risen there, and at this date from 74 to 77 was the time for the Hebrew people to receive the Messiah. But notice that that time, in other words, they were going to receive the one in whom the ministers of Moses and Elijah were, where the fulfillment of the coming of the Messiah for Israel was, of the Anointed One. But at that time, he was just being born. And since Moses broke the program, notice that all the elements were in place for everything to be fulfilled in 77. Everything was in order. Look, there was the forerunner in the midst of the church, in the seventh stage. There was also the deliverer. In other words, notice, everything was there that would fulfill the rapturing faith, would fulfill the gathering of the 144,000, would fulfill even the 10th vision, because a tent would have been set up at that time that would fulfill the requirements for that. But look, first of all, at that time, from 74 to 77, back then, they did not have that type of tent we have now, which are structures like this one that we put together, which is a tent cathedral. And there we can begin to see that it was not the time. On that side, then we can begin to see something of that new program, of that new hard drive which begins to work. And notice, if the massacre had happened in the decade of the 70s, that would have been very difficult for the Hebrew people to rise as a nation at that time, because of the advances that the world would have. And it would have been more difficult to the Hebrew people, and they would not be as they are now, a well-established Hebrew people. And in the divine cycle again of that new program, of that new hard drive that was placed, which God had already prepared for what Moses did, that he broke the Bible, the program. Brother Branham says that he broke the whole program of the Bible of God. God already had that other program to be carried out and to fulfill what he promised. And then that seventh seal begins to work in a simple way and in a secret. And God then, there, notice, opens that gap where that part of the construction of the most holy place was missing, where those living stones are placed with the call of the great voice of trumpet, with the come up hither of Revelation 4, placing them in that place where it is already built, because he had made that gathering in all that time. And the reaping angels then make that separation, that segregation. In other words, the whole program that Moses broke, which was already outlined, all the elements were there. All the characters were there. But notice how then God has another program, because God is an ordained God. And even though that program was broken, because of that, he will not stop fulfilling his program. Moses broke the first tables, but because of that, God was not going to tell him, well, you make two ready and rewrite the law again, the 10 Commandments. That is, God will always fulfill his program. And notice how there, even though all the elements were there, they were there for that date. Notice how then that mystery of the seventh seal comes into fulfillment, which was a secret. So much so that God did not fulfill that new program that he placed after the one Moses broke. He did not place it and did not allow it to be with the deliverer himself, with the same one. As it happened back then, he told him that you were going to deliver the people, my people, you are going to deliver them and introduce them into the promised land. But it wasn't Moses, it was Joshua who introduced them. And notice, he did not allow us to use the same deliverer to introduce us to the promised land of the new body. But he already had that trumpet of God, because it is the acclamation, the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God. He already had that trumpet ready to be played, to be sounded by another instrument. And that other instrument then would have the shout, would have the voice of archangel, and would have the trumpet of God. Then in the last one, he will put together that which Moses broke, which all the elements were there, but Moses broke it. But then God comes and makes a package, let's say a package. He places it all together in one at the end. And then there is when that promise is fulfilled of entering the people, which is ready to bring them into the promised land of the new body. 9 years after, 1965, notice, a son is physically born there. Now, notice how that new program begins to be fulfilled, which nobody knew about it. And for many is madness, for others fanatism, for others it's impossible. No, it can't be, because it's a new program. And that which was going to be happening in the fulfillment of that program only at the end time, in the last day, would be known by the church bride, by that people who have prophetic insight to look and to see that new program, which in that new program, in that new hard drive, they're in there. And those people who would understand it are there. And they can understand that there the dispensation of grace was working all the time, in which the ministry of our brother William Soto Santiago was here on earth. It was thought that it was the dispensation of the kingdom open, but it was the dispensation of grace. That is why many thought, or still think, that we were in the dispensation of the kingdom and the age of the cornerstone years ago. But they did not realize that that program was already broken. God was carrying out another program in which that gap was open and mercy was extended. We can say the dispensation of grace is extended. And see what it tells us in the book of the seals. On page 121, where it tells us. Now notice, but it's to be revealed when the Lamb leaves his intercessory place from the Father. Let us go just before this to see what we're talking about. It says, now the Lamb in the time of intercessory back here, he knew that there were names in there that was put in there from the foundation of the world. And as long as them names have never been manifested on earth as yet, he had to stay there as intercessor. And he writes, the last one enters. And above he writes, future. Did you get it? Perfectly predestination, see? All right. He had to stay there because he came to die for those that God had ordained to eternal life. See? See? By his foreknowledge he saw them, not by his own will. His will was that no one should perish. But by his foreknowledge he knew who would and who would not. See? He knew everything. Therefore, as long as there was one name has never yet been declared in the earth, in other words, in that new hard drive, there were still people there for whom he had to stay on the throne of intercession, because the call had already happened to take the book. Notice, all the elements were there, everything was there. For him to come out of the throne of intercession, he would bring the title deed, he would deliver it to a man. That man begin to preach and do that claiming work, and the Hebrew people would receive it. And the 144,000 Hebrews would be sealed. The Great Tribulation will begin, and the millennium would already be happening. The millennium was already happening. We were already enjoying the millennium. But in that new program, you and I were there. He had to remain there at the throne of intercession for those last ones. And they were the most important ones. They were in a hard drive and in a program of God, of the Bible, a new one. They were the one pertaining to the most holy place. In other words, it was the most important part of God's program, which he had it in another hard drive. He knew what Moses was going to do. And he had the most holy place apart. It was not that place and that content of that hard drive. It was not inside the other one that Moses broke. But notice how that dispensational interlace then, there one dispensation intertwines with the other, which is in that part of that new program, in which there were sons and daughters of God that had to be redeemed. They had to come to this planet or manifest themselves in flesh in human bodies, and God to make intercession for them there, when they would receive Him as their only and sufficient Savior. In other words, until the last one did not enter, he could not rise from there. But then he comes and says, he continues saying, page 121 in the seals says, Christ had to stay there as an intercessor to take care of that name. But as soon as that final name had been splashed in the Clorox or bleach, then his intercessory days was over. Let him that's filthy be filthy still. Let him that's holy, he is holy still. See? And he leaves the sanctuary, and then it becomes a judgment seat. And he just a cornerstone and the ages. And in the cornerstone, he says, and then it becomes a judgment and an arrow toward the cornerstone there. Seat. Woe unto those outside of Christ then. And below where it says, outside of Christ then, unto those outside of Christ then, he points an arrow toward the bottom part, the ages. Now, notice, but it's to be revealed when the Lamb leaves his intercessory place from the Father. Now that's Revelation 5. Now he takes a book of seals, or the book sealed with 7 seals, breaks them and shows them. Look, at the end of the age now, after the intercessory is over, the church ages has done finished up. He came in the first age, Ephesus. He revealed himself and sent the messenger. And there he writes beside it, in a Bible study he has written, they will be revealed when the Lamb comes out of the mercy seat. In other words, comes out of the place of intercession. And then that place becomes the throne of judgment. Now, notice here, where he tells us also in the book of the seals. On page 134, it says, in this other book, also on the page we just read, he writes, at the end of the ages. That is at the end of the ages. That is when that would be happening. On page 134, it says, we all know as Christians that God swore to David that he would rise up Christ to sit on his throne and give him an everlasting kingdom here on earth. He did it. And Jesus said, he that overcomes the Antichrist and all the things of the world shall sit with me on my throne, as I have overcome and have sit down on my Father's throne. Notice that the one who defeated Goliath, the one who was not in the panorama, he was not in the panorama of Samuel's program, but it was in God's one, and he appears. Then when he says to him, don't you have another one? See, then another program comes in. Wait, now let's prepare this boy, because I didn't prepare him. I thought he was one of these 7. But now you want to tell me that none of these 7 is him. Well, let's see if you have something to put on this boy, because no, I didn't prepare for. I couldn't imagine that it was that one. See, many will be able to say the same thing, as it is a new program which is being carried out, because it is a program that nobody knew about it, nobody know it. Didn't the Lord say there, the angel said to John, don't write, let it pass, don't write that. I will reveal it. When will he reveal it? When they have the need to know. And when is that? Look, right here he goes on to say, now, someday he rises from the Father's throne and goes to take his own throne. Now he comes forth to call his subjects. He comes out of the Father's throne, it says, and goes to take his own throne. That is a human throne. Now he comes forth to call his subjects, for he always uses a veil of flesh to carry out the work that corresponds to the claim. And in all times he has done so. That God will work, for he works by means of a veil of flesh. Now he comes forth to call his subjects. How is he going to claim them? Well, for if he is already going to be on a human throne, how is he going to claim them? It says, he's already got the book of redemption in his hand. Glory. Oh, I feel like singing. And he says, a day that is still ahead of us. And he draws an arrow toward the cornerstone and the ages below. Now notice what a day is ahead. After the last elect came in, after the baptisms were stopped, the Holy Supper was stopped, that belongs to the dispensation of grace, where the time of mercy has been extended for those elect. What is next? The age of the cornerstone. That messianic age continues, that eternal age, and there begins to run again that last divine cycle of the 1954 years, which is the time after the destruction of back then in Jerusalem. Now watch how that divine cycle returns again to be carried out, and God to be working in the midst of the people, which pertains to the 70th week of the prophecy of Daniel, which will have a beginning in this end time, that part of the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation will have a beginning at some point, which is said, if we know when the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation will begin, we would know how long before that the 3.5 years of that ministry of the two olive trees would have begun. Now remember that God has in his program, for example, he told them 120 years and I will destroy. But notice a little more time elapsed. In other words, many times God hide things. For sure, the 120 years, that first day they were all there, look and see. Then those scoffers starts to come out. And all those people to mock the divine program. And they start to call a false prophet. He cannot be, because look what he said, that it was going to rain. And he's stuck in there, locked up. He just locked himself up, and not a drop of rain has fallen. Not a drop. Surely it was the sunniest day. But God does it that way in order to show his glory. And also that all that is in the people's heart come out. Now, notice that then, he says there, in the writing, they will be revealed when the Lamb comes out of the mercy seat. That is why the content of the seventh seal is being made known, is being opened. And this great mystery of the seventh seal is being made known. And see how everything, then God puts it so and so hidden, that even Brother Branham, when he asked him, do you remember the name that you were looking for when you dreamt of it? Notice, let us say everything, like everything was new to him. And he sees there a ministry working, operating. And as he wrote there also in quotations, the miracles were already happening, and Brother Branham wasn't there. Notice, all of that was new to him. The first and second pool were known by him. However, the third pool, when the angel said to him, "You're ready for your third pool?" And after he done what he did, he brings it up higher. See how all those things were affected by what Moses did for smiting the rock for the second time. He broke the program of the Bible of God. Well, these are some little things that I was about to talk to you about in these days, and taking advantage of the fact that our brother Andres is on this trip, on this tour. Here, some of the things that God has been giving me came forth related to that subject, which we have already talked something of it. But there is still much there of everything that was affected in the divine program. And by the temper of Moses, there he broke that program of the Bible, which is a type and figure of the organizations of the denominations, which in this end time will also try to break the divine program. Now, notice that it is important to have the temper under control, as he spoke to us in that message a little while ago, which we streamed on Sunday, when he spoke to us about the temper of Moses. But God had everything already in that other program, in that other hard drive of the computer. We can represent it there. God already had it there. And we are now seeing how God is opening our understanding, the scriptures, and how God has been fulfilling at this time that mystery of the seventh seal, that mystery of the coming of the Son of Man with his angels. And thus, with his coming, give us the faith to be transformed and taken to the marriage supper of the Lamb. So everything, notice, everything worked out for good. Everything worked out for good. For us. For those chosen ones, the wise virgins, which the third pool is impacting, is giving them that revival, that awakening, so that you receive the knowledge, the revelation of the seventh seal, which the thunders are making known in the fulfillment of the 10th vision. May God bless you. May God keep you. Thank you very much for your kind attention to all the brethren there gathered with our brother Andres Cruz Gallegos in the congregation that the Reverend Eliseo Martinez pastors. There to all the pastors of the southern Veracruz in Soconusco, and all those who are gathered there, and all those who will be listening later to this conference, this chat, in the different places that we mentioned at the beginning, that our brother Andres Cruz Gallegos will be going to, and in every place where you have ministers' meetings in these days, you can hear these words for everyone. Notice, so that you may see the time I took at the beginning, that I do with much love, affection, to mention all those. It was several minutes. Now imagine all those who call or write, that write to me, so that I send them a few words at the meeting. If I mention all those who ask me for greetings, the greeting would take half an hour or more just to mention all the places that are gathered. And I don't used to do that, which I did at the morning at the beginning of the conference, of this chat, to mention all of them. But it is better to say, and in all the places where you are going to be. But please understand so that some pastors do not feel bad if you do not mention them where they are going to be. For example, our brother Miguel, who is going to take a tour. But sometimes not all of them are mentioned, but it is said everywhere he goes. Knows that in my heart, and all the love toward one is for all. And I always have you with me, and I remember you with much affection and much love. I remember you. And I know that those words are going to reach you as well. So, to all of you who will be listening to this conference on this occasion, God bless you, and God keep you. And those who will also have a meeting tomorrow, because there are some who have written to me that they will have meetings tomorrow as well. You can also play these words as well. And on Friday, and when I can send some little words to someone, I also send them to them. I have done it so. And all in harmony and united in the upper room in the age of the cornerstone, we continue to receive everything that God has given us in this new program, the claiming program. Let's place that subject, the claiming program. The claiming program. He had a program of redemption at his first coming, for now he has a claiming program, the claiming program. May God bless you, and God keep you all, and may you continue having a happy day and weekend full of God's blessing. And we greet the missionary Miguel Bermudez Marin, who will soon be celebrating his birthday. And we will always be praying for him, so that God may continue blessing him, strengthening him, and continue giving him much wisdom, much understanding, much knowledge of the divine program, corresponding to this end time. And may he continue being a light for all the places where he goes. May God
les
bless
bendiga
you
grandemente
all
a todos.
greatly.